Hello, everyone. This is Nayiri from Low Carb and Fasting. Well, today we have returning guest, Professor Robert Lufkin, on our channel to discuss his recently published book, Lies I Taught in Medical School and the Truths That Can Save Your Life. Dr. Robert Lufkin, welcome to Low Carb and Fasting.
Hey, Nayiri, it's a pleasure to be here. Always a big fan. It's great to be back.
It's great to have you. So last time you were on this channel, it was before the book was published. We're all very, very excited about the book. Now you shared a few of the lies that were in the book. Now that, well, thank you, by the way, for sharing a PDF copy of the book with me. But now that I read all the lies, there's so much more in the book. And I didn't just enjoy the lies, but I enjoyed the truths, because you didn't just point out the lies. You went into some, I would say, detailed explanations, which I did appreciate. Use metaphors, the Tor metaphor somewhere in the second half of the book. We'll get to that in a minute. I've got pages of notes here with me. So let's start with in the beginning of the book, you share an image of my mom and I with a story of obviously relevant to how you started this journey. Why don't we start with that story?
Yeah, well, I talk about my mom and growing up, and my mom was a dietitian. So I was exposed to the what were the conventional medical wisdom, the best nutritional advice that was available at the time. We followed the food pyramid, and we avoided egg yolks and eggs because of the cholesterol and saturated fat. We religiously substituted margarine for butter, and replaced the saturated fat of margarine with the trans fats and seed oils of butter. And we thought we were doing all the right stuff. So that was the environment that I was raised in.
I mean, it's not the worst of environments, if you think about it, because you didn't grow up eating processed junk foods. Your mother was a dietitian, so appreciated at least the value of real food.
That's right. And I think I developed an appreciation of nutrition as being important. Like, it wasn't that it didn't matter, but it was important. So, and then I wound up going to medical school. And so I'm sure that had my mom's influence, had an influence on me there. And I, spent my whole career in medical schools teaching, and also I'm sure there was a fundamental influence back with that photo of me and my mom, my mother and I, my mother and me.
I love that photo, and I love that you put it right in the beginning of the book, and you started off with that story. There's always something about images with our mothers, right? So, something touched my heart there. Okay, now you do say in the book, these are your words, I trusted science that could not be trusted.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Well, that science is always changing. The quote I used, it was the basis for the title of the book, or the inspiration for the title of the book, was a quote by one of the greatest doctors who ever was Sir William Osler, who famously spoke to a class of graduating medical students on the day they were to become doctors. And he said, this was over 120 years ago, he said, "Gentlemen," and most of the doctors sadly at that time were male, but he said, "Gentlemen, I have a confession to make. 50% of what we've just taught you is wrong. And furthermore, we don't know which half it is." And of course, anybody who's familiar with science, and medicine in particular knows that's really the nature of science, that it's constantly evolving, and whatever we know to be true today, is there's always the possibility, as we understand that our model of reality gets better, that it will be replaced by something else. So that was kind of the inspiration for the title of my book.
I totally agree. And I think science is evolving at a much more rapid rate now than ever before, probably because of citizen scientists getting involved and because of social media, which isn't always negative. It does have a positive role in that respect. I mean, almost all of my clients have some understanding of nutrition now. They say, oh, I've read this study. Did you see that? When was that ever a thing? I don't remember ever.
Yeah, I mean, that was
Being
one
the
of the
educated
things,
public, we were.
yeah, that I noticed. Not only is public awareness increasing of these things, but also the rate of change of knowledge is increasing. These chronic diseases, our understanding is accelerating, and longevity itself,
Yeah.
our knowledge of longevity is increasing in the last 10 years more than it's ever done before. So it's an amazing time to be an individual out here. We get access to, like you say, the original source articles. We can go to sites like PubMed on the internet, and assuming they're not behind a firewall, we can get the articles and read them for ourselves. And it's a time of empowerment for all of us. And part of the message of my book is that lifestyle is something that we get to control. And for chronic diseases and metabolic health, it's the single most important factor, more powerful than any pill or any surgery that the doctors will give us for many aspects of the disease. And lifestyle is not something that is something that we get to do for ourselves. It gives us a sense of agency and empowerment. The doctors can't make us healthy. They can only make us unsick. We're the ones who make us healthy.
I love that. Yes, that's so true. That is true. Okay, now you call certain lies the 3 deadly lies. Now, one of them is the obesity lie. The next is the diabetes lie. And of course, there is the heart disease lie. Now, why do you call them deadly lies?
Well, obesity, diabetes, and heart disease are seemingly different diseases, and the way they manifest is different. But this was, again, a theme of my book, and was a revelation to me when I began researching this book, that many of these chronic diseases that determine our longevity, and that you and I and most of your listeners statistically will die of, and will determine how long we live. All these diseases are treated separately, but at a basic level, they have a fundamental set of root causes related to metabolism, inflammation, and insulin resistance. And that was the exciting message. So obesity, diabetes, and heart disease are really 3 stages on a progression almost. It's not that everybody that's obese gets diabetes, or everybody with diabetes gets heart disease, but they are linked. And these are 3 of the most important diseases today. We're in an epidemic of diabetes, of obesity, first of all, to start, that we've never seen before in the history of the planet, even correcting for the population. In the United States, most people are either overweight or obese. It's never happened before. And this happened over a relatively short time, over a period of a few years. And then 10 years later, we saw a spike in diabetes, largely type 2 diabetes. But now we're seeing unprecedented numbers of pre-diabetics and diabetics that are also occurring. And then heart disease, we're expecting increases in that as well. So these are deadly in the sense that they're very serious diseases that if we don't take action with them, they can have very harmful effects on our lives.
Yeah, I think it's very, I mean, anyone can see the link between them because all diabetics are told that their risk of cardiovascular sort of disease is much higher. The risk of, in fact, kidney disease is much higher. We all know that so if you so maybe it comes down to blood sugar control. And the importance of controlling blood sugars, because by diabetes, we're really talking about not well-controlled type 1 diabetes or diabetes as in well-controlled type 2 diabetes. We're talking about blood sugar dysregulation. So how important is the blood sugar? Because you're very supportive of people using a CGM.
Absolutely.
You cover that in the book as well. I've been using it nonstop since 2017. I'm, of course, type 1, and not everyone out there needs to use a CGM, but the CGM gives us data that we have never seen before. We would not be aware of in any other way.
Yeah, it's amazing and great news in the United States, at least, unlike England, where they're available without prescription already, I believe. But in the United States, beginning this summer, individuals will be able to purchase CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, for themselves without the necessity of a doctor's prescription, because there's some pushback from doctors. I don't know why, but about using CGMs, when I think I agree with you, it's knowledge, it's information that we've never had access to before. But in writing this book, my views of diabetes changed a great deal. I mean, I used to think of diabetes as something that people either got or they didn't get, whether it's type 1 or type 2. And, the rest of us don't have diabetes and that's it. But some papers have come out that changed my thinking on it. And that is, there's a large study taken from the Framingham data and the NHANES data, which are large population sets of adult Americans without diabetes. And what they found was if they track the hemoglobin A1C marker, which your audience is very familiar with, if they look at this marker in these non-diabetic adults, what they see is with time, it goes up and up and up like that with normal aging. So what does that mean? The message to me was that type 2 diabetes in this case is something that most, if not all of us, are facing if we live long enough. In other words, it's sort of like gray hair. If we don't die of something else first, we're on the path for insulin dysregulation, insulin resistance, and ultimately type 2 diabetes. So what does that mean? So for me, it informs the lifestyle choices I make now as if I were a diabetic, because I might as well be, because we're all becoming insulin resistant, and I'm not going to wait for my doctor to cross that threshold and then say I'm a diabetic. I'm going to make choices about lifestyle and nutrition and other factors that will protect me down the road.
That's so true. It's fascinating for me. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, but you must see the same as well. It's absolutely fascinating when people share their lab tests with me from the previous 5 years, 6 years. I can see the HbA1c starting point, maybe 5.2. A year later, 5.4. A year later, 5.8. It just goes in one direction. It never actually goes down. It just keeps going up. So it's fascinating if we can catch these people early enough before they are officially diagnosed as diabetics, because they're on the path to diabetes. Wouldn't that be great? We can actually help them. So I'm all for, people using CGMs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because the same driver, and I would argue the same drivers for type 2 diabetes, the insulin resistance, the inflammation are also driving cardiovascular disease, are also driving cancer, are also driving hypertension, are also driving Alzheimer's disease and mental illness eventually. And you know, it may be that we don't cross over to type 2 diabetes. Instead, we get cardiovascular disease, or we get but it's the same factors. Unfortunately, the same lifestyle choices we make affect all of those diseases. It's amazing.
And even cancer, which does come up in the book, the second sort of half of the book. So,
Yeah.
So where does dietary saturated fat come in this equation? Because the common belief was that, okay, dietary saturated fats and cholesterol are to blame for heart disease.
Yeah, I mean, back with my mom growing up, we were very concerned about dietary cholesterol and dietary saturated fat, to the point that, like I say, we'd go to a restaurant, or at home, we would have egg white omelets. We'd take the yolk out because that's where all the cholesterol is. And similarly, if we go to a restaurant, we have meat, we would cut the fat off the meat because most of the fat is the saturated fat is in the fat on there. What's happened today is that our understanding of this has changed, although many people, including doctors' knowledge, have not changed about this. But first of all, dietary cholesterol, even Ansel Keys, the famous person of the diet heart hypothesis who advocated low-fat diets, he now recognized, he's admitted that dietary cholesterol has little effect on serum cholesterol. And the American College of Cardiology just a few years ago announced that too. So the whole demonization of eggs is probably incorrect. It is incorrect, and it's being recognized more and more. In fact, I consider a hard-boiled egg one of the most perfect foods you can eat. It's probably nature's Ozempic. Eat one of those instead of an Ozempic, and your appetite will go down and all that. So for dietary cholesterol, there's no question that eggs are not a problem, or any other source of cholesterol, seafood and that, crustaceans, that sort of thing. Even there's a whole discussion about serum cholesterol, and we can get into that if we talk about statins, but the whole point of dietary cholesterol was to keep serum cholesterol down. Well, if serum cholesterol doesn't matter, then, dietary cholesterol doesn't matter either. But the point is, the whole dietary cholesterol is off the table. You don't have to worry about eggs. As far as saturated fat, I also believe that that's not a problem. I believe that saturated fat in our diet is a healthy alternative to things like seed oils or industrial oils, which are pro-inflammatory and can drive insulin resistance. So I think, a healthy diet is going to include saturated fat. And that's what you need to replace these harmful engineered things called vegetable oils, but there's no vegetables in them at all.
There's barely any nutrition in them.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Now when the people call them engine oils.
Yes. Yeah. They were developed. I love this story. The first one was developed by German scientists in World War I as a possible lubricant for submarines, and it later became Crisco, which was sold to Procter & Gamble, and Procter & Gamble then bankrolled the American Heart Institute, which today has on their website that vegetable oil is heart healthy, and canola oil is a heart healthy substitute for saturated fat. So you can see the pernicious influences down the line.
It's interesting because, my listeners might be under the impression that all of these dietary guidelines are only pertinent to the United States. But people don't know actually people around the world whose governments don't have an official dietary guideline, they actually adopt American dietary guidelines. The American dietary guidelines are actually influencing dietary choices over the globe. So it is very serious. And the grassroots movement that we're all part of, in my opinion, is very important to change that. Because when I was growing up in the Middle East, that had nothing to do, no connection with the United States, in a country in the Middle East by the Mediterranean Sea. I remember we used olive oil at home. And then one day my grandma said, oh, you know, what a shame, we've still got some in the bottle. That was like purchased from neighbors living in the mountains. It was pure, it was clean. She said, what a shame, we have to throw this out because apparently that's not healthy anymore. So then, of course, we started using sunflower oil, right? So we were influenced because, you know, they heard something in the news and they replaced the good products. Butter, we didn't use butter. We used sunflower oil all the time, pretty much the whole time. It's sad, but this is why what we're doing, I think, is very important. We need to educate people to make better choices, perhaps based on evidence.
Yeah, all these recommendations are, like you say, are not just recommendations, but they're being adopted by governments around the world. And even, you know, in the United States, these recommendations drive what are fed to our soldiers, our military, who are fed to the school programs, school lunch programs. They get sent all the way there. And people think of the food pyramid as a health advice, but it's really not. As Nina Teicholz pointed out in there's some great reporting and great articles, that the people who put together the food pyramid are basically representatives of the junk food industry, and it's more a recommendation to eat junk food. Because if you look at the bottom line of the food pyramid, which is what you're supposed to have 6 to 11 servings a day, the most food of all, it's all junk food. It's cereals, it's grains, it's you know, empty calories, and things that will benefit the junk food industry.
I love it that you say in the book, you actually say, I no longer take money from pharmaceutical companies. I like that very much. So
I don't think they're interested in paying me.
Not anymore. Not anymore.
And Coca-Cola too. I lost them as a sponsor for my podcast.
Well, you're speaking the truth, so they won't be interested in people speaking the truth. Okay, so what's wrong with calories, Dr. Lufkin?
Well, nothing's wrong with calories. I think there's
a misconception. The calories are everywhere. Everyone now knows or understands calories, and yet obesity crisis is getting worse and worse.
Yeah, I think there's a misunderstanding about calories that sadly is still taught at my medical school and other leading medical schools around the world, and that people still believe that there's a saying that a calorie is just a calorie, so that eating a certain number of calories will cause certain effects on your body, and it doesn't matter what type of calories they are. And this is completely mistaken. We think of the 3 main food types that your audience is aware of, you know, fat and protein, which are the 2 macronutrients which are essential to life. If we don't eat those, we will die. And then the third one is carbohydrates, which are not essential to life. In fact, there are many human populations, or some human populations, that don't eat carbohydrates to any significant amount, and they're actually quite healthy. So the idea that calories from each of these groups is equal is mistaken, and that's due to the fact of the way these calories have these food groups have on our body. And the main effect is, of course, insulin. And carbohydrates strongly affect insulin, whereas fat and proteins do to a lesser extent or not at all. And insulin is really the issue there, because as as we all know, insulin tells the body to store fat. So it stores fat. So if I eat 100 calories of, let's say, carbohydrates, let's say potato chips, I will stimulate my insulin, and then maybe let's make up a number, 50% of those calories will be stored as fat. So I'll only have eaten 50%. I'll only have 50 calories available to me. On the other hand, if I eat 100 calories of a hard-boiled egg, hard-boiled eggs are primarily fat and protein. There's very little carbohydrate in them. So insulin won't be spiked. I'll eat the hard-boiled egg, and those 100 calories will go entirely to my body. So what's the net effect? At the end of 100 calories of potato chips, guess what? I want to eat the rest of the bag. Whereas 100 calories of hard-boiled eggs, very few people cannot resist eating the entire dozen eggs, so that's a fallacy, I think, that harms people who are trying to lose weight. That doesn't matter what you eat 100 calories of donuts or 100 calories of hard-boiled eggs or cheese, and it's just the same, which that's in the face of it, not true.
Yeah, also calories, I think, don't take into account the nutrition value of the foods. There are 100 calories from Mars bar, doesn't have the same nutritional value as 100 calories from, I don't know, even broccoli or steak. So
absolutely,
that's another problem with calories. Doesn't look at the nutrition.
Yeah, totally. And people still believe that, though. And there's a strong motivation for the food manufacturers to continue that lie, or to sort of popularize it in the mainstream.
And we have restaurants around the world now displaying the calorific value of everything on their menu.
Yeah.
Which
I mean,
useless, but
one saying I like that people say is, that I don't count calories, I just count carbohydrates, because that nothing else matters. It's not exactly true, but largely I find in my own life, when I avoid carbs, my weight is under control. It's not an issue, and I don't have to worry about the other stuff I eat.
Now this takes us to metabolism. You have chapter 2 all about metabolism. If you ask any person what metabolism is, it's the rate at which the body burns fuel or produces energy. They would say something along those lines. So what is metabolism, and how is it linked to metabolic health?
Yeah, metabolism. I mean, when I went to medical school, metabolism was sort of it was how we digest food, which is true, but it's not the whole story. I believe metabolism is really our metabolic health is really the underlying driver for most of the chronic diseases that are going to determine how long we live. And it's probably the most significant thing in our organism is our metabolism. And it goes way beyond just digesting food. It's about controlling all the diseases that eventually control our longevity.
You use the metaphor of Queen Tor to. I think this comes. Yes, this is in the metabolism chapter 2. So I like that. It felt to me like, okay, he's right, sitting in there and talking to me, like explaining. I'm in his class, and he's the professor explaining this to me. So shall we cover? Can we talk about that? So who is Queen Tor?
Oh, well, Queen Tor was a metaphor for understanding arguably the most important metabolic switch in living things, which is a molecule called TOR. And it's to indicate its importance. It's conserved over evolution for billions of years. It's present in cells all the way from yeast to human beings. So anything that's kept along those, it has to be very, very important. The interesting thing was it wasn't even discovered till the end of the 20th century, almost the beginning of our century. So it's it's amazing that this molecule of such importance was completely unknown until almost the 21st century. But it's very simple and very important in its elegance and its function. It's a survival switch for the cell. It detects the presence of nutrients. And if nutrients are present, it tells the cell to do one thing. And if nutrients are not present, it tells the cell to do something else. And I use the metaphor for Queen Tor, like kind of a Game of Thrones style castle, where if you imagine food being present outside the castle, like the harvest is coming in, then Queen Tor detects that food is abundant. She opens up the gates, allows the food to come in, but because foreign stuff is coming in, she increases the guard duty, which symbolizes inflammation. So, but she tells the castle to start building new rooms to grow. So that's when Tor is turned on. The switch, it detects nutrients, and then it tells the organism to grow, turn on inflammation, and prosper. Then when food is not present, let's say there's a famine, Tor will tell the cell to close the gates. Because the gates are closed, the inflammation can turn way down. The guards, you don't need the guards because the gates are closed. But because there's no food coming in, you need to make do with what they do. So they go around the castle and they look and they repair things. If a piece of furniture is broken, they take it and they use it for firewood. And anyway, so these are analogs or metaphors for the repair is autophagy, which is something the cell does, which is a very healthy thing when mTOR is turned off, and also decreased inflammation. When mTOR is turned on, there is growth and inflammation, which are growth in itself is a good thing, and inflammation it can be good, but when it's turned on chronically, it can be bad. But Queen Tor is a metaphor for this primitive signaling protein that we talk about off and on throughout the rest of the book.
So where's the insulin in this imagery? So what's the relationship between insulin and Queen Tor?
Yeah, insulin and Tor are associated intimately. They're networks of mTOR and AMP kinase and other activations there. So when mTOR detects nutrients, it detects not only glucose, which is a driver for insulin, but it also detects insulin itself, and it also detects oxygen and other things like that. So insulin is going to turn on mTOR, turn on inflammation, and all those things are related. So with higher insulin levels, we get mTOR turned on, and that's like insulin resistance. As we get older, the HbA1c goes up, the insulin goes up, and mTOR turns on more and more, and we get locked into this growth mode, and we spend less and less time in repair mode with autophagy, because the idea is that a healthy organism is going to be both in growth and repair mode. In other words, mTOR, both modes are good, but we need to have both to be healthy. When it's locked into one mode, like growth mode, that's not healthy. And as we talk about later in the book, this actually drives not only the phenotypes of aging, wrinkles, gray hair, hearing loss, menopause, but also drives the chronic diseases that ultimately determine our longevity: cardiovascular disease, heart attack, stroke, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and mental illness itself.
You did talk about autophagy, but so one of the best ways to switch off mTOR is fasting, right? You mentioned that in the book, and of course, Dr. Jason Fung would agree with you. Dr. Fung, by the way, has written the foreword to the book. So let's talk about fasting.
Yeah, Jason Fung, I'm a huge fan of his. He's written some great books about obesity, diabetes, and cancer. He's a brilliant man. I love his quote about fasting. He said, the one thing that Jesus, Mohammed, and all the great Buddha, all the great spiritual leaders can agree on is that fasting is healthy. And he, of course, has built his work around fasting and the benefits of it. So fasting is something that, if you think about it, it's you don't have to change what you eat. You only change when you eat. And by changing when you eat, you can actually create more time in your day. And you can save money in some cases by, not that you eat less altogether, but there's less grazing and everything. So even narrowing the eating window has health benefits, and that's the first thing that we can all do. I mean, I used to graze all the time. My mom was a dietitian. She told me the conventional wisdom was eat many small meals, throughout the day, and that was a healthy thing to do. Now I eat basically, I started off by, I used to eat all the time. I started off by, after dinner, I brushed my teeth and stopped eating. That way I was basically lazy. I knew that if I ate again, I'd have to brush my teeth again. So, and then I'm more of an extreme example. I cut between meal snacks, but then I even cut out breakfast, and then I even cut out lunch. And now I have one meal a day with my kids. And for me, it's the right thing. I've never felt better, but it gives me, a 20-hour fast every day, which has certain metabolic effects even for that short period of time.
Mm-hmm. I've been doing, even as a type 1 diabetic, I've been doing one meal for a very long time. Now I've switched to 2 meals. But again, any period of not eating has its benefits, because it's going to turn off the switch, or fat storage switch, if you like, and reduce inflammation. So it does have positive impact. Oh, you do mention the story of the Scottish man, Angus Barbieri, who did fasting for 382 days. So he was 27 years old. He lost 275 pounds. How did he do it?
Yeah, that's a great.
He lived off his own fat.
Yeah, that's a great story, and that shows how my attitude about fasting changed. I used to think that fasting was somehow dangerous, and if I don't eat, if I go for 3 hours without eating, I'll get, quote, hypoglycemic, and I'll have all sorts of problems. But now, of course, I fast 20 hours a day or so, and it doesn't bother me at all. But it changed my thinking about what our body needs and the way our metabolism works. And so, yeah, this Angus Barbieri, and to the point, like hopefully most of the stuff in my book I reference, I reference, and this Angus Barbieri fast was actually reported in a scientific paper where they recorded his blood glucose. So it's not just an anecdote, hey, this guy fasted. It was actually, he was studied at a hospital. But it's pretty remarkable to think he could live that period of time only on, I think he had some vitamins maybe, but also primarily it was water. It was a water fast. But it speaks to the fact that our fat contains what we need to survive, and we can go a long time without, we can go longer than we think without eating.
Yeah, it depends on how much fat you carry on you. I couldn't go that long. I would never be able to go that long, because you do bring the example of Gandhi, right? Who obviously was completely different context, right? And he couldn't, by day 5 of his fast, I think, he was suffering and his life was in danger. So, but it is possible, if you are carrying a lot of fat, to actually go many, many days, even months, without food. But you better do it under medical supervision.
Exactly. Yeah. To be clear, he was under medical supervision. And if you have a medical condition, you may not want to start fasting without checking with your doctor. It just depends on what your condition is.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, so we talked about insulin. Insulin actually turns the mTOR switch on. It turns inflammation on. And now you're not only more inflamed, but you're starting to store fat, right? What does acute stress do? Because you do cover that in the book as well, acute stress.
Yes, stress is interesting because stress can be a healthy response to an event. It can drive inflammation. If I get, let's say I pick up a rose and I stick myself with a thorn, that's an acute event. There will be inflammation around the puncture mark of my skin. There'll be swelling, there'll be redness, there'll be inflammation. So all those things are good. The problem with stress is when it's chronic, when it's on all the time. That's the problem, because it drives inflammation. This low-grade inflammation is at the root of the metabolic disease, the insulin resistance. These are all linked together. So stress can be good and it can be bad depending on its chronicity.
So how would you define chronic stress?
Chronic stress would be it can be from the environment. It can be from factors in our lives. It can also be from things that are going on to us, going on metabolically, or things that we eat. For example, wheat. Wheat contains many proteins, most famously gluten, which if you're allergic to gluten, you have celiac disease. Most people don't have celiac disease, but many experts now believe that up to half of adults have low-grade allergies to proteins in grains, which inflame gut permeability and also have a low-grade inflammatory reaction throughout the body. So this can drive inflammation. As we talked about with the Queen Tor metaphor, even eating food itself, just normal eating food, any kind of food, will turn on inflammation, because inflammation is the acute body's response to foreign material coming in, and food is foreign material, so it activates and inflames our gut. The problem is, if we eat all the time, then the inflammation is turned on all the time. That's one of the other advantages of fasting, at least for gut inflammation and the inflammation due to food, we turn it off there. So there are a number of things that drive inflammation. Fructose drives inflammation. There are things that inflame the blood vessel lining that contribute to cardiovascular disease. Those also drive inflammation. So there are many, many factors. The net effect of it is just like insulin resistance, just like hemoglobin A1C. With time, with aging, inflammation gets to be greater and greater and greater. And it's one of the prime drivers of all the diseases of aging.
So you also mention environmental toxins.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I don't think we, in this space, in the sort of low carbohydrate nutrition space, we talk much about environmental toxins, but they are very, very important, because I think they're responsible for many of our mental health issues.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the environmental toxins.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obesogens.
Yeah, a great point, Nayiri. It's not enough just to correct the diet, correct the sleep, correct the exercise, correct the stress, if we're being poisoned by something. And that's what environmental toxins are. So we need to identify those, and sometimes they can be at the root cause of driving the metabolic abnormalities. So things to think about: mold. You know, if you've had water leaks in your house, if there's a funny smell in your basement, you know, mold can be very difficult to diagnose, and the effects of it can be difficult to diagnose. Things like lead. You know, lead paint is no longer used. Lead in paint, lead in gasoline is no longer used, but the but the effects of it are around. Lead paint is still present in houses, and even if it, the dust can have lead in it. The soil next to highways where leaded gasoline is present can have lead in it. If you live in a city, there can be a lot of lead in there. Similarly, mercury with environmental exposure from seafood. Mercury can reach toxic levels. And there's even controversial, but something to think about, the old use of dental amalgams. Some of us are old enough to have mercury fillings where mercury was put in our teeth, and that can even contribute to certain things. So there's a whole list of toxins and even parasites. Some people are attributing the rise. There's a school of thought that the rise of chronic diseases in the 1980s was not due to the seed oils or the sugars or these sorts of things, but is actually due to changing regulations with sushi and other uncooked foods that were uncooked meats that people began eating and led to all sorts of different parasites. So, but to your point, absolutely, these environmental toxins are key to recognize, and they're very difficult for doctors to diagnose. Even doing a lead test can be difficult. It's not a matter of a simple blood test. And there, Mark Hyman is a well-known functional medicine specialist, and he's developed a multi-symptom questionnaire that you can get it online, that it looks for sort of the types of symptoms that would indicate that one has a systemic toxicity, because they can be vague symptoms like headache, like irritable bowel, like tiredness, joint pain, that a conventional doctor may, get confused or overlook, or it doesn't fit any single pattern. But if you think you have those, that questionnaire is available online from the Cleveland Clinic, and it can, if you score above a certain point on it, then you can look towards systemic toxicity from a number of possible things as a possible cause.
I'll try and find the link and put it below as well. Now, you have I think it's a whole chapter or a subheading in one of your chapters that's called Sugar 101. I like that. Reminded me of my college days. So Sugar 101. I think it's important because when you say sugar, most people think of the white powder or the confectioner's sugar that's usually put on cakes. And they say, well, I don't eat that much sugar. They don't look at carbohydrates and all the other types of sugar and starches as sugars.
Sugar
is an important chapter, I think, in this book.
Yeah, sugar is very complex, and I think it's been made unnecessarily even more complex by sugar manufacturers and big food, who have a vested interest in confusing people. And thus there are many different synonyms for sugar that appear on ingredient lists that may not even sound like sugar. But I guess the key point is, if you remember, three types of three embodiments of carbohydrates and sugars. And the first is glucose, which we've talked about already, in the bloodstream, that we measure with our continuous glucose monitors, and which stimulates insulin. Then there's a second one called fructose, which is fascinating because it doesn't really stimulate insulin. In fact, the American Diabetic Association used to recommend fructose for diabetics to take. It's very sweet. It's even sweeter than glucose. It's what appears in fruit. And it was evolved to attract us to eat fruit to gain weight prior to hibernation and all that. But so fructose is the other type of sugar. And if you combine fructose and glucose with a chemical bond, you make the white table sugar called sucrose. The other one I want to mention is starches that you mentioned, which are basically glucose molecules gluing together. And things like rice and flour are these starches, which seem innocuous, but as soon as they enter our mouth, they're very quickly digested to glucose. So it's almost like eating any other type of sugar. So if you want to avoid sugars, you should probably avoid starches. But that's the main sort of the high level glucose or sugar 101 on there. And then you can dive into high fructose corn syrup, which evolved in the 1980s, was discovered, and it basically replaced cane sugar in junk foods. And it created a new disease that had never been seen before the 1980s. And this disease is now the #1 cause of liver transplants and liver failure. It's called non-alcoholic liver disease. And one of the lies is that there's no known cause of no known treatment for non-alcoholic liver disease, which I believe the evidence is strong, showing that it's due to fructose toxicity. Just like ethanol is a toxin, it's detoxified in the liver. Fructose is also a toxin. Unlike glucose, it doesn't get metabolized by any of the cells. It goes straight to the liver. Both fructose and ethanol are metabolized very similar pathways. They both cause liver damage, and they both cause fatty liver disease. And Robert Lustig at UC San Francisco has done some great work on reversing fatty liver disease, which people say it has no cause. They don't know what causes it. There's no treatment for it, but he's reversed it in kids in a prospective controlled study by substituting glucose for fructose in their diet isocalorically. So it's the same amount of calories. The only thing he changed was remove fructose and put in glucose. And it changed to the point where you could actually see the changes on imaging studies in a matter of weeks from their liver fat damage.
Yeah, I like that study, because he was giving them glucose, and those kids were able to use the glucose because most of our cells use glucose. I once said in a podcast I was recording with Dr. Gary Fetke, I mistakenly said, with hindsight, I should have thought better, but I said, all our cells, of course, can use glucose. And then he corrected me, he said, most of our cells can. So now I shouldn't make that same mistake. So most of our cells can use glucose, but the fructose was what was causing these kids to develop fatty liver disease. And of course, they were not drinking alcohol. So.
Yeah. And if we want to be in the weeds on fructose too, about 10% of fructose is metabolized in the gut. So the other 90% is in the liver. So it's not just the liver. The gut can handle 10%, which leads people to believe that 10% level, the normal, is kind of the normal amount of fructose that we could eat. When it exceeds the ability of the gut to metabolize it, then it becomes a poison and goes to the liver to be detoxified. That's
fascinating. That's really interesting. Right. You were very interested in longevity. Now let's define that to our audience, because by longevity, we're not talking about living longer, living a decade longer while being very, very sick. We're talking about living a healthy life. That's what longevity is to you, right? Let's talk about longevity and why is it important?
Yeah, the older I get, the more interested in longevity I get. I can't figure that out, but it's important for a number of reasons. Because first of all, we are living longer, and there's a revolution we're undergoing now in our understanding of longevity. And people aren't going to be living to 70 on average. They're going to be living to 100. And I think we need to understand the possibilities with that, the upside, the downside, and learn how to deal with it. If people are retiring at age 65, what are they going to do for another 35 years of their lives? Golf courses are fun, but they're not that fun, So it's about thinking about how you want to frame your life, mindset, purpose. And these are all very, very important things, I think. And just the way society looks at longevity. There's a reason that, a high percentage of firefighters die within 5 years of retiring. There's a reason that many people die within a few years of age 65, because they retire at age 65 and they lose their purpose and meaning in life. So the whole question of longevity opens up so many things, population demographics, there's population collapse in China and Japan and Italy and Europe. Longevity may help avert that if people live longer and they're still productive, that may help there. But there are so many questions about longevity, but it's coming at us very fast with breakthroughs literally every month or so with our understanding of it.
And of course, dementia and other mental health, sort of deteriorating mental health conditions like Alzheimer's are part of the longevity sort of debate, right? Because longevity to me is living not just longer, maybe not even longer than what you were destined to live, but living a healthier life, being not losing your cognition.
Absolutely. Nobody wants to live for an extra 10 years in a nursing home. That's not a win. But the surprising thing to me that I wasn't aware of was that longevity, I mean, in the United States, it's not appropriate to list old age on a death certificate when you fill out the death certificate, although Queen Elizabeth died of old age on her death certificate. But in the United States, it's not the cause of death. So when people die, they don't die of old age. They die of, the list is actually short. What you and I and all our listeners are going to die of. It's a short list. Statistically, it's number one is heart attack and stroke. Number two is cancer. And then, Alzheimer's and a few others down there. So it's a very short list. But the point is these chronic diseases are intimately determined or tied to longevity in that they determine our longevity. So if we can delay the onset of Alzheimer's, we can delay the onset of these other diseases, then our longevity increases. And that's the whole point.
When I interviewed you, I think it was about a year ago. It's actually in the top 5 most viewed videos. So my interview with you before the publication of your book. So, and there was a comment under the video. One lady was saying, but I'm really interested. What does Dr. Lufkin eat on a daily basis? So I promised her when I invite you back, I would ask you. So this is just for the lady who was interested in what Dr. Lufkin eats on a daily basis.
The kind of food I eat.
And so what do you eat? So you already
sure.
You eat once a day now. But if you were to eat, say, I don't know, twice a day.
Yeah.
What sorts of food are you eating?
And let me have a disclaimer here. I love my vegan friends. I love my carnivore friends. I was personally a vegetarian or vegan for 10 years, and I've been a carnivore at different times. I think it's possible to live a healthy life and a very unhealthy life with any of those eating styles. So it's not about being plant-based or animal-based, but instead it's about avoiding some of the bad foods in there. And for me, it's junk food, and junk food I consider to be food that contains carbohydrates and starches for the reasons I mentioned, the seed oils that we've already talked about. And then also for me, I exclude grains also, which in the United States, grains are soaked in a weed killer called glyphosate, which is illegal in 34 countries for its health effects. But in the United States, it's still used. And also the protein we mentioned, that grains have a lot of protein that can drive leaky gut and cause low-grade inflammation, even in people without celiac disease. And for that reason, I avoid the grain. So if you cross out those, then look at my meals, that's what it'd be. So it might be salmon or, Brussels sprouts or chicken. And fortunately, I have a wife and family who support the way I eat. And, this is just for me. Everyone gets to choose their own, one meal a day is radical, So it doesn't have to be that way, and you don't have to follow what I do. It's just, this is an example. You can pick and choose little steps, whatever works for you.
I'll see if I can find some of your food photos. You've posted it online. I will put them on the screen specifically for the lady who is interested
All
in
right.
Lufkin's foods. Very last chapter in the book is about some lifestyle changes. Let's talk about them quickly and then we'll wrap this up.
Okay.
So what lifestyle changes would you recommend to people?
Okay. The nutrition ones, certainly, even if you don't want to change what you eat, like we talked about earlier, you can change when you eat with fasting and things like that. If you don't want to change when you eat or what you eat, there's one more thing you can do. If you think about the 3 macronutrients we talked about, fat, protein, the essential ones, and then the non-essential one, carbohydrates, which drive insulin and have those untoward effects, we want to protect our body from the carbohydrates. So what we can do is, if we're going to have a meal that has all 3 of these, food order is our friend. In other words, we don't want to eat carbohydrates first, then they get absorbed rapidly through the gut. Instead, always put carbohydrates last and begin your meal with fat or protein. That will coat your gut, line your gut, and slow the absorption of the carbohydrates and mitigate their effects. So that's the diet things. Sleep is really important to pay attention to. It's not just sleep quantity. I think I wasn't aware, but there's growing evidence that it's actually a fairly narrow window of sleep quantity that people need. It's about 8 hours, and much less than that or much more than that can be harmful as far as cardiovascular risk and other things like that. So that was new to me. And then also sleep quality. We need to pay attention to not just how much sleep we get, but the quality sleep. And I also pay attention to exercise, not only physical exercise, but mental exercise as well. These can have dramatic effects on our metabolic health. And actually, I was blown away. You can actually see the changes on the brain scans in a matter of months in the size of the brain, both with physical exercise or with mental exercise, on structures that change rapidly, like the hippocampus, presumably mediated with BDNF, or brain-derived neurotropic factor. But it's remarkable that you can actually witness your own brain healing and recovering and growing. And the last thing is stress. And, we talked about stress and mindset and the way we look at the world, the way we frame our future. Is it a future of abundance and love and goodness? Do we have purpose? Do we have meaning? I think those things are all important.
And community.
And community, absolutely, yes.
Dr. Lufkin, how can people contact you? You have all of that in the book. You provide all the links on how people can contact you or even join some of the programs that you're at the moment. Let's talk about some of those. And I will put, of course, the book link below as well for everyone to buy. Is it available in Europe?
Yeah, it'll be in English-speaking countries. We're negotiating with foreign publishers now to, there's been interest in foreign rights from various countries. So as soon as those are finalized, if anybody has a, established publisher in their country that wants to find out about the foreign rights, I'll put them in contact with our publisher.
Perfect. Okay, so how can people join your programs or contact you for help?
Yeah, my website, and also on my website, you can download, if you don't want to buy the book, you can download a free chapter and check it out, see if you like it. But my website is robertlufkinmd.com. And I'm active on social media, so you can follow me there. I have a podcast. We broadcast to X, LinkedIn, YouTube and Facebook every week on Tuesday at 11:45 a.m. It goes out to 300,000 listeners.
It's one of my favorite channels. I like seeing the faces. So I'm not a podcast person, but I like seeing the faces. So I go on YouTube.
It's a video podcast. Yeah. So
I love the video. I love
stream. Yeah.
Right. I can't thank you enough for your time today. So we'll certainly do this again.
Thank you, Nayiri. It was a pleasure being here. I want to have you on my podcast again soon also. So, but thanks again and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. Bye for now.